Hi, this is Akim. Welcome back to my channel. Well, analyzing what's been happening in Mexico City since the collapse of the elevator metro back on May 3rd, it seemed to be a pattern of questionable decisions were made pertaining to this line. How do you know they had an elevated line in Mexico City until this collapse? So, if we go through the timeline, which, by the way, probably the criminal investigators are doing the same thing, trying to determine when and if or what or whom had anything to do with what happened with the structure coming to the crescendo of this collapse on this day. All I know is at 10:30 that night, this is not a rush hour train. It just left the station. As the last two cars went over the section in question, the structure collapsed, taking down those two cars and all the infrastructure that went with it, killing 24 people and injuring around 70, maybe more. Now the thing is, this has been a controversial line since the beginning of its construction. So around 2012, this line opened under controversy, not only for the construction, but the running gear the train was using as well, because the metro usually is built the same way the Canadian Montreal's transit system or France's transit system is built. They have rubber tires. They run on concrete and steel tracks. But for this construction on the elevated, they went with conventional steel wheels, regular rails. I don't know if it's concrete ties or wooden ties, but traditional running rail. And already they were having problems with the structure when it opened. They claimed that the curves were too tight and the rails were deteriorating very quickly. That's the first problem. But I don't think the rails itself would have caused the structure collapse. However, 2 years later in 2014, the structure had to be shut down for emergency repairs. So I'm sure that the running rails had nothing to do with that. It had to be poor construction and questionable maintenance. And repairs were made. Everything seemed to be fine until September of 2017. A magnitude 7.1 earthquake rocks Mexico City. A lot of older buildings went down. Even though the L still stood up to the quake, there might have been some damage, and this is where the controversy continues. They do not know if the structure was damaged, or if it was, what repair was made. There's photos of other section of the elevator structure that's questionable about its maintenance. Now we're going from 2017 to 2021. Question is, was the maintenance done or wasn't done? That's the key question. Now, if you add all this stuff together, you would see bit by bit the timeline of how this thing started from the beginning to the end. Now, the question is, of course, once the investigation's over, what's going to happen next? Is that structure going to be repaired and used again, or they're going to have to tear it down? Because quite frankly, I wouldn't ride that thing. I operate trains on elevated structures like that, but of course ours is not the same as Mexico, because we have a regular steel elevated, and it sometimes is encased in concrete, like on the F line or on the A line. The F line, Smith and 9th Street, Bridge, as well as the Rockaways. But we have columns on either side, steel columns. The Mexico's columns is more like bark, one bit thick concrete column. I'm guessing it had to be rebar because a steel column encased in concrete would have probably done a lot better holding the structure up. But like I said, we don't know how this thing was built. We don't know if the corners were cut. We don't know if maintenance was probably done or not. All I know for sure is at 10:30 that night, the last two cars just didn't make it out of the area when it collapsed. There's a lot of anger, a lot of frustration from the families, the victims, of the deceased. Even though there's an investigation going on, unfortunately, Mexico's history of corruption is an ongoing situation. So this is not the first time that a questionable thing happened on the Mexican government. So they're going to say, oh, I shouldn't be saying that. But we have history and receipts of it, these things. So it's not like I'm making this up as we go along. So all I know is if it turns out the whole structure is to the point that it's in danger of collapsing, it shouldn't be reopened. It should be torn down and may rebuild again. Or relocated in a safer right away so it wouldn't collapse. That's what I think of right now. And I'm sure people were wondering about the tracks that were still in the air after the structure came down. Well, being that if it's what I think it is what they call the right-of-way was the train was laying on conventional ties and rails. There's also something called ballast, the crushed rock that's used to keep the track stable, as well as drain water from the structure. So, since the structure wasn't really tied down to the tracks and the structure wasn't tied down to each other, so naturally, when the structure went down, only the tracks that had the train on it went down with it. The tracks that didn't have the train still stayed on. And this was the potential for another disaster had there been another train. Because if the track stayed upward, that means the circuit is still intact. So the operator of another train would not have known that the structure went down, especially at 10:30 at night. You don't know how the condition is. You probably wouldn't have been able to see it. And if he did, would he have been able to stop in time? We don't know. Luckily, we don't have to answer that. All we know is one train went down. It did went down. So the families deserve an answer to what happened, what's going to be done to make sure it doesn't happen again, and if the structure is going to be used ever again, or it has to be torn down. Because quite frankly, if I think the structure is not safe, I wouldn't have this standing any more than a day. I would have that sucker tore down faster than that expressway that collapsed in Oakland. Boom, gone. No. So the South can't say so on for now. Don't forget to stop. And by the way, remember, make the next stop the last stop for Asian hate.